Welcome to Sector Report. I'm David Beatson, and this week, the next round in the Crayford Farm controversy. Are you looking at New Zealand's next great power generators? And is there such a thing as friendly fire out on the farm?
We've been watching the weather forecast for a while and waiting for the right one, so looks like today's the day.
For most of us, it's been a gloomy, damp summer, with December and January seeing the lowest sunshine hours on record for most of the country. But strangely enough, it's done nothing to reduce the cost of firefighting in rural New Zealand, where the Rural Fire Authority says we're shaping up for another expensive fire season, with its costs approaching the level we saw last year when the country was in the grips of a drought. Our Rural Affairs correspondent Drew Chappell finds out what's fueling the firefighters' bill.
Fire. There are few forces in nature as destructive and deadly. In recent years, our Australian neighbours have suffered more than their fair share of bushfires, fuelled by dry, windy seasons. And here at home, as recently as last November, tragedy struck Northland when a deliberately lit blaze killed 2 rescue workers.
We've had some pretty tragic circumstances just recently. We've had loss of property, loss of biodiversity, and there's also been a human cost. We're feeling it pretty raw at the moment up here, but and we'd just like everyone out there to understand, what the consequences can be.
What's this?
Northland's top rural firefighter says although fire safety has been drilled into most New Zealanders and towns through schools and TV advertising, fires continue to cause untold damage and distress around the country. It's in notoriously dry and hot areas like Northland, and where rural properties are often hours away from help, that the risk of disaster is greatest. Miles Taylor, who's been involved in conservation for nearly 6 years, says it makes his job even tougher when farmers fail to heed the warning signs.
We have a very large fire risk in Northland. We have a very long growing season, and so we have a large fuel loading, and as a result, of course, our fires can be quite large. It's about people being responsible with the use of fire. We have restricted and prohibited seasons that we enforce, and it's about the landowners knowing when those are in place and modifying their behaviour appropriately.
The 21st of November was another hot, dry and windy Northland day, just like this one. Perfect conditions for a devastating fire to spread rapidly through the White Cliffs forest here in South Hokianga behind me. In total, more than 350 hectares of forest land were destroyed at a cost so far of more than $500,000.
In the last couple of months, we've had 4 significant fires. We've probably spent in excess of $1 million in fire suppression. All of those fires were preventable, and it's just about having a knowledge and an understanding what the consequence of rural fires can be.
Even after a relatively wet summer for much of the country, farmers and landowners still need to be vigilant when considering the use of fire as a land management tool, especially in isolated areas.
In a rural sector, when a fire gets really engaged with the fuel, it does what we call a run, and in some instances this can be hours before we can actually get crews into that fire to actually do any suppression activity because of the heat intensity. So the damage that can be done is enormous, and the fires can move very, very fast, and as a result there's a lot of things that can be put at danger.
Hopefully it'll go according to plan.
Terry Holmes is one of thousands of New Zealanders using controlled burns to get rid of unwanted wood and organic waste.
We've been watching the weather forecast for a while and waiting for the right one, so looks like today's the day. We'll keep an eye on it and come back with the tractor and stoke it up and that sort of thing later in the day, so yeah.
How long do you reckon it'll take for all this to burn down?
Probably 3 or 4 days with the size of the logs that's in there.
Does the forecast usually have it pretty bang on?
Yeah, not too bad. They said light winds today, and it's chopping around a bit, but mainly from the southwest. I love it when a plan comes together.
But when the fire dies down, beware. Constant supervision and vigilance around the smouldering embers is critical, because sometimes the fire will continue to burn underground, often for weeks.
The fuel can hold a lot of heat, and we can be going back to the same fire site for months at a time to ensure that the fire is completely out. And that's an escalation of cost as well, because somebody has to go back and check and continually recheck, and that just keeps on adding to the bill. So it's a huge inconvenience to us, and it's a huge cost to the landowners.
And that's why Miles Taylor stresses the need for a burn plan, much like a spray plan, well before reaching for the matches.
When a farmer goes out and does, for example, a spraying operation or does shearing, they go through a mental checklist of what they need to achieve for that operation to be successful. And we're really asking that farmers do the same thing when it comes to rural fire. What is the weather conditions going to be? What is the heat of the day? What is the relative humidity? What's the wind conditions? What fuel's in front of the fire if the fire got away? What would happen if the wind direction changed? All those sorts of things. They're just simple checklist things that they need to be doing in their mind before they light a fire.
So the Rural Fire Authority is offering its expertise for free to any landowner who needs assistance in planning a burn-off.
Normally this time of the year you wouldn't be able to light fires, you'd be just too dry.
In Northland in particular, where my fire authority is, we're very happy to work with farmers to use fire as a land management tool. It's a very effective land management tool, but there is risk with that, and they need to understand those risks, and we need to work with them to help them understand. And in some instances where it's a large area of burn, a burn plan may be required, and we would work with the landowner to make sure that their burn plan was covering all the bases. All the local fire brigades know when a fire is going to be lit. We've made sure that they've got water supply, they've got sufficient machinery on site, sufficient people available, that there's good access to the site should we need to suppress anything, those sorts of things. And they're fairly simple things to go through. It doesn't take much. There's no cost to the farmer. We'll do it all for free. But we are very much encouraging farmers to take that step and engage with us.
And along with this, there are helpful online tools to assist with planning too, as well as places you can go to assess the risk or legality of lighting a fire.
It's meant that the fire danger has stabilised a little bit, and in fact it's gone down slightly, but it would only take 2 or 3 days of fine weather and we'd be back up to where we were. We advertise in the newspapers and on the radio what the season status is, but the easiest way would be to ring their local council or fire authority and just ask what the season status is, and whether or not, if it's a restricted season, if they need a permit before they light a fire, and if it's a prohibited season, obviously there'd be no fires at all. It's just a matter of being aware that there is situations that they may need permits or may not be allowed to light fires, and just to educate themselves as to when those are.
So remember that old saying, if you play with fire, you're likely to get burnt. With the tragedy of November last year still fresh in their minds, landowners will hopefully take fire safety far more seriously.
Drew Chappell reporting. Coming up, what's happening in the next round of the Crayford Farm controversy. Welcome back to Sector Report. Any hopes of a quick resolution of the long-running struggle for ownership and control of the bankrupt Crayford dairy farm empire look well and truly dashed. The High Court has ordered the government to review its approval of the sale of 16 Crayford farms to the Shanghai-based Pengjin International Group. The Prime Minister says he'd be surprised if the Overseas Investment Office makes an early recommendation. Pengjin's New Zealand-based rivals in the Crayford Farm Purchasers Group have lodged another appeal with the court, and the group's iwi partners are considering a treaty claim against Landcorp and Land Information New Zealand over their dealings with Pengjin, and some members of one of them have occupied a sacred site on one of the Crayford farms. All in all, the picture just keeps looking more and more complicated. So what's the Crayford Farm Purchase Group trying to achieve? Spokesman Alan McDonald joins us now. Welcome, Alan. Well, the Prime Minister doesn't think the controversy is hurting the government. What's your view? What are your polls telling you?
Well, the only poll that we did was back in last October, and that actually said one of the questions was, should the government stop this transaction? And 81% of the respondents said yes, which, as you know, in polling land is a phenomenal response. So that was the only official one that we've done. There's been another official one by somebody else and several unofficial ones since, and they all show the same numbers. That the very large majority of New Zealanders are opposed to sales of this type.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword for you, though, isn't it? You don't want to play the politics of the issue, you're playing the issue.
No, the issue for us is that the OIO, we believe, has applied the Act wrongly, and that's indeed what Justice Miller found.
Indeed, he has ordered them to go away and review the recommendation for approval. Have you been providing the OIO with any additional information as they undertake that review?
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little longer now, we provided them with a detailed sort of legal submission, our legal viewpoints on a number of the points raised by Justice Miller and included in Pang Xing's bid, because we finally got to see that. Nearly a year and a half down the track, we finally actually got to see what they were offering. And also some of the economic and other benefits. We put in a submission based on that because we believe we can match or better those quite comfortably.
I'll come back to that in a minute. But in the meantime, you have lodged another appeal with the court. What's that about? Are you just trying to delay, frustrate by litigation until Peng Jin simply says, "Oh, this is too hard, we'll go away"?
Well, no,
find something else to do.
We don't want to delay it. We'd actually quite like to get on the land. As I've said to you before, I think, David, our guys live over the back fences of these properties and they can see them deteriorating. And as anyone who knows New Zealand dairy farmers will understand, when the guys like this walk down the road and they see a bit of land next door going, I can do better than that, they kind of get itchy fingers and they want to get on there. So, and also we've got to hire staff and share milkers and those sorts of things, and it's that time of year that people are gearing up for the new season. So in an ideal world, we'd like to get on with it.
Why not wait until the next step in the review is completed?
Well, I think as our buying group have gone through this exercise, you discover all these things that have happened in the recent and distant past, where fairly significant numbers of farms are going out the door to people who aren't dairy farmers. They're buying the farms low in the market, and they will hang on to them. They're paying cash, so they're getting nice, comparatively good returns in the interim. And then when the farming market comes back up, I'm sure you'll see a lot of those people just flick them on and exit for a cash with no capital gains tax. So it's quite a good investment for those non-farming interests. And that's a concern for our guys who are all dairy farmers.
Okay, there is another experienced farmer on the fringe of all of this, Alan Crafer himself, saying he'll get back into the action. What's your attitude towards him?
Well, if Alan's got the wherewithal to get back into it, then I guess he's a rival bidder. But at the moment, we regard ourselves as the only clear other New Zealand bidder on the table, cashed up and ready to go.
It's clearly going to drag on, and it's clearly quite complex. You've got, in fact, also in your group 2 iwi, and they are taking or considering taking another action. Is that part of your group strategy, or is that their strategy?
No, that's a separate iwi strategy. Obviously, we were aware that they were considering this. I think you have to realise just how angry and upset iwi are about this. Hardy Penny's group, this is the third crack they've had at trying to buy these farms. And the two Whare Toa guys as well, they've had claims, or this land was taken off them back in the 1800s. They see a commercial opportunity. They've got the wherewithal to actually buy the land back and reacquire it that way. And they're being frustrated, and it's making them quite angry, by two government SOEs who are supposed to take into account iwi and do things with regard to iwi concerns and issues. And the view of our guys is they simply aren't doing that. They're actually facilitating a deal that works against the best interests of the iwi involved.
Well, their anger and their concerns over this has reached the point where some of them have actually occupied one of those farms. Are you involved in any way with that?
No.
And what's your attitude towards it?
Well, we were surprised as anyone when the iwi group walked onto the farms. But no, we're not surprised by it. I think it just shows the depth of frustration and feeling that there is in the area. And I think that's also reflected in what Ngāti Ririahu and Te Whare Toa are doing.
Come back to this question of significant benefits. Peng Jin's required to demonstrate significant benefits for New Zealand. Can your group actually show that it can match and even exceed those benefits?
Well, it's quite easy to exceed the benefits, David.
It is if you pay a lower price.
Well, no, not even there. Straight away, there'll be $20 million a year more coming in and payout into New Zealand, because if you think back to the structure of the deal with Landcorp, they're saying it's a 50-50 share milking type deal. Based on current figures, that means 20 million of the dairy payout automatically goes offshore. If it's New Zealand owned, that's $20 million straight back into the local King Country and Taupo economies. So there's $20 million a year for a start. without doing anything.
Okay, but one thing Peng Jin is saying is, look, we come with the capacity to develop products specifically for the Chinese market, which is very important to New Zealand. We've got the connections to enable us to spread distribution throughout China. Isn't that an advantage that you can't match?
Sure, a couple of things in there. First of all, the farms will be supplying Fonterra, so it will be up to Fonterra to decide what products get made from that milk. They're not going to send separate tankers to 16 farms to say, oh, we must make high value products out of the milk off these farms. So it's going straight to Fonterra anyway. The other thing is, I've heard talk about the owner of the business being well connected in Shanghai and up in China and maybe opening a few doors, but that's a bit like Sir Henry Vanderheyden walking up to Jonathan Ling in the Air New Zealand Corrie Lounge and say, hey Jonathan, I hear you know a few people in Australia, can you market our milk for us? It just doesn't happen. And the third thing in there too, David, is that we're aware that the three major Chinese dairy companies, Yili, Menghui and Bright Dairies, and Bright Dairies already have a presence in New Zealand, are actually actively either scouting themselves or have agents in New Zealand and Australia looking for sites to build processing plants. You're going to have Chinese-owned dairy farms supplying Chinese-owned factories straight into the Chinese market. I'm not quite sure how that accrues as a benefit to New Zealand.
Okay, very quickly, they're prepared to be monitored in terms of their progress. Would you be?
This monitoring question, it doesn't actually happen. The OIO has no resources or capacity for monitoring and enforcement. In fact, if you think back, Mei Wang, who was the original deal that's now been found to be fraudulent, she actually bought 4 farms without OIO approval. 20 months later, the OIO is still scratching its head and trying to figure out how it's going to unwind that deal and get those farms back. So they don't have monitoring and enforcement. We're quite happy to put up with any.
You're prepared to put up with any?
Absolutely.
Alan, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Alan McDonald, spokesman for the Crayfer Farm Purchasers Group. In just a moment, we'll see if energy production can be a cash cow or fill the piggy bank for our livestock farmers. That's next on Sector Report. NIWA, our National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, has been developing a new energy source that can power farms and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's pig poo. And NIWA's built a system that stores pig manure in a deep pond so bacteria can break it down to produce methane. The methane gas gets trapped under a cover over the pond, so a farmer can draw it off to use the fuel to heat a boiler, drive an electricity generator or warm a piggery. The system's been tested in a Taranaki piggery, so where to from here? NIWA research engineer Stefan Hubeck is here to explain. Stefan, thanks for joining us. I know you're recently at the Expo in Mystery Creek. Was there much interest in the new power generation system there?
Right. In general, the Effluent Expo organised by Waikato Regional Council talked about effluent management and the future changes in effluent management generally. There was certainly a great mood of change there, that the regulators as well as the farmers more and more understood that the environmental performance of effluent management needs to be revved up a couple of notches. But what was very positive was that farmers in particular are beginning more and more to appreciate that farm effluent is a resource rather than a waste that relates both to the nutrients contained in the effluent and increasingly so to the energy, basically the technology that we are trying to further.
Well, you were talking about the recent trial you've conducted at a Taranaki piggery. Tell me, how much power can a typical piggery produce from the animal manure?
Right. You get this standard answer that it depends. It depends on how
yeah, obviously.
How big the pig farm is and of course how energy efficient it is. But as a basic number, 100% energy self-sufficiency is within the realms of possibility.
Really?
Yep, certainly for the farrow to finish closed loop piggeries that seem to be the majority of pig farms that you find here in New Zealand. Of course there will be outliers if you have a grow out unit only where you would have an excess of energy, and the reverse if you're only into breeding. But yes, certainly the 100% energy self-sufficient pig farm is within the realms of possibility.
What is the real emissions impact, the greenhouse gas emissions impact of the system. You say it's an improvement, but you're still burning the gas.
Right. The
Layman question.
Yeah, the greenhouse gas mitigation that you achieve by implementing a manure-based biogas system are twofold. For one, the standard manure management system does release methane into the atmosphere uncontrolled, and according to international accounting methodologies, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, 21 times or 23 times more potent than CO2. And if you stop that methane going up into the atmosphere, you have a reduction in those fugitive methane emissions. The second benefit that comes in is if you then utilize that methane as an energy resource for generating electricity or for some heating applications, you are displacing fossil fuels or fossil fuel derived electricity that would have been used instead of that biogas, and you thereby get a secondary greenhouse gas benefit by displacing those fossil fuel resources.
So effectively you'd have a system which would enable you to measure how much you're actually reducing emission.
Yes,
and therefore be very good under the carbon trading scheme. How much is it going to cost to put it in, and when do you get the payback?
Right. It's again this answer that it depends. For one,
love that answer. But
yes.
Come on.
Sorry about it. It certainly depends on the size of the farm. Economies of scale certainly work in your favor, so larger farms have a benefit there. Mm-hmm. But it also depends on how much infrastructure is already existing on the farm that could be used for a biogas system. For example, if a farmer has a standby generator because he sees a risk there in power supply cuts, being a risk to his business, you can use the standby generator as a user for the biogas, for example. So there's a cost reduction there. Similarly, on the effluent handling side, if you have to have effluent storage ponds, for example, or you have to upgrade these, it's very easy to incorporate biogas recovery technology into that, and therefore you have synergies in that area. But in general, I would say that for the larger farms that are relatively energy efficient, 3 to 4 year payback periods are certainly possible.
Okay, and I've seen a figure of 120,000 as the basic gas capture and gas flow system cost.
Right, that was the figure that came from
your Taranaki trial.
Exactly, from the system in Taranaki, and that included the whole biogas use side, the generator, gas cleanup, as well as a custom designed and custom built covered anaerobic pond. So there will be cases where the investment costs will be less.
Are there some operational hazards that you'd need to be aware of?
Certainly, you're dealing with a flammable gas, so there are some safety rules that have to be followed. Also, if you have a generator on site, it's all the electrical hazards that come into that, or if you operate a boiler on biogas, well, there are safety rules that have to be followed in boiler operation for that matter. So there are some rules that have to be obeyed, but it's not necessarily adding a new major safety concern to the farm that needs to be managed in a very special way.
Now, I understand that 35 years ago, during the oil shock, that some New Zealand farmers were actually ahead of the game. They were doing this sort of thing, capturing methane gas from pig manure and using it to run cars, vehicles, machinery. Have you actually advanced the technology any?
Back in those oil shock days, you're very right, New Zealand was actually leading the pack in that area. And what actually happened is that during the times of very low energy prices in the mid-90s, New Zealand stopped progressing that technology pathway, whereas other parts of the world did. So currently countries like Sweden get 2.5% of their road fuel demand from biogas. Germany gets 2-3% of their electricity from biogas. So other countries have continued along this way, but in New Zealand we have this gap of not much happening throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And where we see our simple pond-based technology being an improvement over the old style technologies that were used back in the 80s is that we basically can get the same amount of biogas from our manure resource much less technical sophistication. So you no longer need to heat the manure, you no longer need to build a concrete tank. It can all be done in an earthen structure, much simpler, much easier to operate.
Good to hear that an increasingly expensive waste is being turned into a valuable resource.
Exactly.
Stefan, thank you very much. Stefan Hubick, Research Engineer with NIWA. And that's all for this week. Remember, you can check out this program anytime online at country99tv.co.nz. Thanks for your company. I'm David Beatson for Sector Report. See you next week.